This is Hard Pass, an analysis of press coverage of the top political story of the day. White House correspondent Brian Karem and university journalism professors Dr. Michael Meyer and Dr. Mark Mederson host Hard Pass. In this episode, is it 1984? The team will be looking at the firing of Erica McIntyre, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Labour Statistics. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm Mark Mederson, Assistant Professor of Electronic Media at Texas State University. Welcome to Hard Pass. With me, as always, Dr. Michael Meyer, Journalism PhD, Assistant Professor of Communications at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and my former office mate at UW-Madison, who often took the chips out of my lunch in our office refrigerator. Dr. Meyer, you still owe me a bag of Funyuns.
Listen, let's hit the Chinese food restaurant. We used to go to AA China in AA China. Yeah,
University Drive.
Yes, our University Avenue. That should be our first sponsor.
Yeah, if it's still there, I can't remember the last time I was there. If it's because they just tear everything down right along campus.
Yes.
Also, the man, the legend, the myth, White House correspondent Brian Karem. Brian, say hello to our nearly as legendary listening audience.
Hello, nearly legendary listening audience. Hello, Gracie.
Now that's going way back. So before we dig in, we already did an episode entitled Don't Shoot the Messenger about President Trump's penchant for suing media outlets. Some said those suits were based on unfavorable coverage. Now, he's fired the commissioner of a government agency immediately following a bad report from that commissioner and that agency. Let's listen to this NBC News report about the firing.
A red day on Wall Street after President Trump did what he's famous for, firing people. This time, the head of labor statistic, Erica McIntyre, who Mr. Trump says, without evidence, isn't reporting accurate numbers. McIntyre not commenting. It comes after the Labor Department reported fewer jobs than expected were added in July, while also revising down by 258,000 the number of jobs created in June and May. On Truth Social, Mr. Trump posting, "We need accurate jobs numbers. I have directed my team to fire this Biden political appointee immediately," insisting the economy is booming under Trump. The president, who had praised previous jobs reports from the same commissioner.
You look at the numbers today, the numbers were unbelievable. The numbers were incredible.
Today, offering this.
I believe the numbers were phony, just like they were before the election. And there were other times. So you know what I did? I fired her.
The weaker jobs report comes as the Trump administration announced a baseline 10% tariff for much of the world and higher for some countries, including Canada and Switzerland. Many economists believe the tariffs will fuel inflation, slow the economy, and cost jobs. The administration argues they will create more jobs. In San Antonio, Swiss chocolate shop owner Matthew Willis says the tariffs are already forcing him to raise prices.
My least expensive chocolate bar is $11, and it used to be $9. So it went up just under 20% already to account for it.
Tom joins us live. Tom, I know you have some more reporting about pressure from President Trump today on the Fed.
Yeah, that's right. One Federal Reserve board member appointed by President Biden has resigned to return to Georgetown University. And Trump today again pressured Fed Chair Jay Powell to cut interest rates, posting that Powell should be put out to pasture.
This episode is called Is It 1984? Based on the plot of George Orwell's dystopian novel about a government who maintains strict control over its citizens. One ways that is done in the story is through the government's control of information. Commenting about the firing, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker referenced Orwell when he said, quote, "It sounds very Soviet, very authoritarian, very 1984, end quote. Dr. Meyer, is Senator Booker being hyperbolic in that comparison?
Well, usually when someone's invoking Orwell, they're being hyperbolic. But what's happening here seems like a very clear attack on one of the roles of government. When we talk about what we expect from government, one of the things that government has done in this country is provide sort of an accurate picture through data, through various types of data collection, economic statistics. We can also talk about weather data, things like that, stuff for people to be able to make use of. Part of an open society is having open access to knowledge of our country and things around us. And when we see the president acting against somebody who's merely, conveying numbers, we should be worried about that. The data is for us. The data is not for them. The data should be for them to make decisions about what policy should look like. We should not be dealing with a situation where the data, where the data becomes a deliverable for the White House's agenda, and that goes for any White House.
Brian?
Well, how do I unpack this? First of all, Orwellian it is, and there are those of us in the press who still don't understand where we are. We want to look and say that, golly gee, we're at a constitutional crisis. No, that's in the rearview mirror. That something that someone said to me, I agree with this. Donald Trump would like to announce that you're either with him or you're sued, deported, tariffed, jailed, silenced, canceled, or fired by him. The fact of the matter is Donald Trump can't handle anything that doesn't want to handle anything that doesn't appease him or praise him. And we have been very poor in the press to hold his feet to the fire. And we are getting worse at doing it. In reporting this story in particular, one of the things that even some reporters are saying, well, Donald Trump has a point, they revised the numbers. Well, here's the point that you've forgotten or that you didn't know. Numbers are always revised as additional information comes in. These same numbers have never been politicized. Instead of reacting with getting rid of the person who brought you the message, you ought to react to the message and say, okay, well, this is what we did. This is what we're doing. This is what happened. These are why the numbers are that way. And we question some of it because of this. That's normal reaction. Firing the person and then telling us in the press, she got the numbers wrong. She got the numbers wrong. How does Donald Trump even know that? It's not like he crunched the numbers himself. It's not like he had access to the data. It's that he decided they were wrong. And we didn't report that accurately or correctly. Donald Trump's problem with this particular issue and our problem in the press in reporting it is that he lied and we fell for it. Again, when he came out and said she got the numbers wrong, the next question from the press, and I had a good friend of his, I wasn't there on the South Lawn when it was said, but I said, why didn't you just say, hey, where do you get your numbers? This is something I have asked Trump myself in front of him when he said the numbers for I'm showing the numbers are horrible for immigration. I go, where are you getting your information? Because I have access of the same information you have, which is provided by the government, and it doesn't show what he says. So rather than getting our facts in order and checking him in real time, we have once again bowed to him by playing, and he frames the issue and we argue within the frame, and that's not the way we should do.
And I heard this morning that those numbers are compiled by, and forgive me if I get this number wrong, but it's at least 200 people that work to get those numbers together. And then the commissioner simply reports the numbers that she's been given.
Yeah. She's a statistician. Or come on. She was an Obama appointee, or she was a Biden appointee. And then he calls Jerome Powell. At the same time, he fired up on Jerome Powell and called him, the head of the Fed, he called him a political hack, an appointed political hack. Well, Don, who appointed him? So once again, it's whatever he says at the moment, you have to take for gospel. And you can't argue with a guy who's and I'd say he's delusional and is showing mental decline, but that's just me. But nonetheless, you cannot sit there and take what he says at face value ever. The only two things I would take at face value with Donald Trump if he said it, is his date of birth and the fact that he's male. Other than that, the rest of it's all up for grabs because the man can't tell the truth if his feet are held to the fire. That's why he was impeached twice.
And staying on that theme, founding father and the second president of the United States, John Adams, said, quote, "Facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they," and here Adams is referring to the wishes and inclination, "they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence," end quote. In essence, Adams is saying that you can't simply state something as a fact purely based on what you wish that fact to be. Brian, you've mentioned several times on Hard Pass that every administration that you have covered has attempted to spin information to make it at least somewhat more favorable to them. You were there in the briefing room during the first term of this president. Is the president in this term going beyond that spin? Is there something different going on here that you simply haven't seen before?
Yeah, well, you may give Donald Trump grief, and I do often, but I'll tell you what he's been very successful at. Our shared reality doesn't exist anymore. The only reality that exists is Donald Trump's reality. He is very successful and has been very successful about creating a reality that we all have to react to. And we're living in it. So what John Adams said was great, but he never met Donald Trump. And he never met the Republican MAGA people today. And he's never met, he, of course, never knew anything about our shared reality on the internet. And that has created an environment that's very toxic, that allows people to stay within their own informational silos. And the reporter's job is to break through that and to report on that. But to do that, to your point, Mark, you have to be cognizant of what's going on. You have to be well schooled. When I was coming up as a young reporter, jack of all trades, master of none, as if that were a bad thing. But you have to know enough on what you're covering to be able to call bullshit, and at least to it. You don't say it. Well, you can say it to their face. God knows I have, but you can at least know the questions to ask to call them into question. Donald Trump flies by the seat of his pants. Most reporters, when we walk into that briefing room to talk to him, or when he talks on the South Lawn, or when he talks in a cabinet meeting, or whenever he opens his mouth, you need to know ahead of time what the issues are and what you're going to talk about, and know what bullshit he's going to feed you, and then be able to come back with facts. And we are not well armed with facts because most of us that are now covering the president are too inexperienced to do.
Well, I'd say the other challenge is the assertions in the face of sort of what we've generally understood as facts, right? So the idea that Trump can say the numbers are wrong without any sort of source of data, right? The question that Brian proposed is a good one, right? Well, what's your source of data, right? Explain to me where your numbers are coming from, because ultimately what we, anyone who's sort of looking at this understands what's going on, right? They don't like the number, and they are deciding, and they've seized on this concept of revisions as though, which is a common process in statistical data collection, especially when you're trying to report things in real time.
Science.
Right.
They do that with science too. They sit there and go, well, you've revised. Once you said that the sun revolved around the earth, and now you're saying the earth revolves around the sun. Oh my God, you're lying. Right. That's politics. That's not science. So, and statistics is a science. So it's the same. It's the same reason why they attack the Holocaust, man landing on the moon, vapor trails, chemtrails, and everything else. And let's not forget Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the worm in his head. So going after vaccines, all of that what you're talking about, Michael, that's exactly where they question every form of science, because if it's a truth, it's immutable, and that's not how science works.
Right. I would actually, and so if you're interested in like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and those processes, there was actually a great episode of the Odd Lots podcast, which is done by Bloomberg, back in April. We'll try to put it in the show notes, I think, where they talked about all the challenges in collecting government data. Right, it was a BLS. There's a former BLS commissioner talking about the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner talking about all the challenges and how decaying the government data collection infrastructure is. And it's fascinating the stuff that they do in there to sort of understand the nature of the economy, right? They pay people to go count the number of potato chips in a bag to make sure there's not shrinkflation, right? The idea that they're going to sell you the same bag with like 5 fewer chips for the same price. So you're getting less for what you paid for. That's a form of inflation, a way that companies sometimes try to hide it. All the things that the government is doing to sort of help us have good data to know what to do, right? The point of that data is so policymakers, business people, anyone can make choices about where to open a business, whether to hire, whether to whether, you know, how to act economically and
How to
by yeah. And so when you sort of make sure that when you undermine those numbers, right, you're not just sort of doing spin for the president. That's part of it. That's what they're doing. But when you undermine those numbers, you make it harder to be somebody who wants to start a business. Make it harder to decide, where you want to buy your house, right? So if you're messing with the climate data, and I want to know if I'm living in a floodplain, I better be able to trust the maps on that. Otherwise, I'm going to have to buy extra insurance. I wouldn't be able to buy insurance.
You're messing with shared reality. Look, I will challenge anyone to go and look up anything about Donald Trump that's supposedly a fact, and you will find that it's all disputed. I'm trying to track down. I had to go back and count myself, and I'm still not sure of the number of days. How many days has Donald Trump spent on the golf course in the second administration? Getting that number alone is all damn near impossible. I've seen 5 or 6 different numbers. I've counted a different number myself based on what the administration has told us. This is not the way we operate. And by you have to understand what his ideal behind it is, or what his goal is, or what his strategy is. And that is, if it makes you question everything, then anything is possible. So maybe Donald Trump is telling you the truth because you can't prove otherwise. So that's why he does that. The strategy is to it's chaos. I call it chaos in a blender. It's to make you everything is so chaotic that you cannot possibly discern what a fact is. You cannot vet a fact. If Donald Trump is constantly throwing, well, yes, but this, and yes, but that. But here's an example, and to your point, Michael, I mean, I've interviewed these BLS people for years. They have a very difficult job to do. And Donald Trump acts like these numbers are just pulled out of you can go to a computer and call them up. And where do they come from? These are magic numbers. There are actually, and there are more than 200 people. There are probably thousands of people either doing it directly or indirectly across the country, assimilating data, the raw numbers, and crunching those numbers to make you understand this is the jobs report, right? So you check companies, you check ads online, you have to check statistics brought to you by, 3 or 4 different parts of the government that tell you, including the Census Bureau. I mean, this is not an easy task, and they do not tip the numbers in anybody's favor. They're statisticians. My God in heaven, they're slaves to numbers. So we are left now having to trust the guy who says he's 6'3" and 235 pounds.
I thought it was 215. Sorry, 215.
215 pounds. We got to trust him for the numbers. He fired the person who brought you the numbers because they were accurate, and he doesn't like them. And he's going to give you numbers. I'll guarantee you the next time we have a jobs report, if that person, whoever it is he appoints, wants to keep their job, we're going to find out that it is the greatest amount of jobs ever created in the history of the government. Nobody created jobs before Donald Trump did. Donald Trump invented jobs. Before then, we were all just lazy laborers laying out in the pasture doing nothing. Donald Trump created the world and we should be happy. That's all that this is about. So back to your original point, Mark, yeah, it's worse than Orwellian. Orwellian is in the freaking rearview mirror. This is Donald Trump destroying the last vestige of independent thought in the United States. It's serious. It can't be overstated. And a reporter's job has got to be to uncover the facts, throw them in his face, whether he likes them or not. And we have to be prepared to withstand the onslaught of his ignorance and his mean-spiritedness and Stephen Miller's racism and Hegseth's putting military in the streets across the country. All of that is going to come to pass. Mary Trump is right. There is no worst with Donald Trump. It only gets worse. There's my rant for the day. I hope everybody
Appreciate it, Pat. Always. So one thing, staying on our Orwellian theme, but getting away from the numbers just a little bit. One of the parts of the settlement in the lawsuit with CBS was that there would be an ombudsman. I believe they're labeling the person that will be from the administration who will oversee the news operation, CBS. I don't think it's unusual for ombudsman to be part of news outlets like newspapers and things like that, but this seems to be a little bit different. Michael, can you talk about that first?
Sure. So ombudsman was a role that I think had a renaissance in the late aughts, early 2010s, right, where newspapers felt like part of their well, let me start back, right? That the challenge for news has been how to sort of regain credibility, or how to assert credibility in a more digital world where people can call them out, whether truthfully or not truthfully. And so one of the ways that the news industry has tried to approach that is the concept of the ombuds person. And that person would be sort of the public's representative at a news organization. So when the New York Times makes choices, right, when they had a public editor, their job was to sort of monitor their inbox, see what questions they were getting about the coverage choices, and then go explain further to the public how that would work. And the Times had one, the Washington Post had one, ESPN famously had one, good old Robert Lipsyte, who I think you quoted extensively in your dissertation, Mark.
Indeed.
And so they would have these ombuds people whose job it was to sort of make sense of the choices that journalists were making to the public, sort of make the news process more transparent. When the government, and that I think is a fine impulse, right? That's a fine impulse when it's going to be imposed when it's done by the news agency as with the purpose of making it clear to the public how they're getting their news, what are the choices that journalists are making when they put things into print or not into print, right? Whatever. It's a very different question when you're going to when it's the government imposing a ombuds person on a news agency, because ultimately that person is being put in there. We can say that person is being put in there as a form of sort of public balance, right? Explain the news process to the public. And if that's what the person does at CBS News, which I think is part of the deal that we're talking about, then maybe this concern will be overstated. But the fact that it's being imposed on them through a government settlement, and the fact that we know that there's sort of an ideological tinge to the to what's going on at CBS, that even if the goal is to keep CBS a straight up news organization, we know that ownership is sort of our donors to the Republican Party, new ownership. So ultimately, what I would say is that an ombuds person who makes things clear to the public with why journalists are making their choices, makes the journalistic process less opaque, that's fine. Somebody who's there to sort of say that's biased, that's biased, that's biased, that person, we're always going to be locked into that person's agenda, because there are biases, right? We know there's news biases, but there's also hostile media effect. There's also people who come to news product with a pre-existing viewpoint and then judge it against their viewpoint, not against sort of the actual practical work that's being done by the journalists.
Brian, I want to ask you now, the ombudsman, this is on the same line. The ombudsman is only going to be part of the CBS news process. And we talked about chilling effect in the past. Will this impact other news organizations?
Well, I hope everybody gets an ombudsman. Honestly, I think the best way to hold, fact checkers and ombudsman are the one thing that we definitely need. I think I'm going to break the mold here and say, actually, I don't oppose what happened because I want an ombudsman. Now, what everyone freaked out about, and we have to I'm going to be ombudsman to the people who freaked out online. Following the announcement that the FCC approved the deal for Skydance to acquire Paramount Global, the company that owns CBS, rumors spread online that as part of the deal, CBS would have to accept an FCC-appointed bias monitor who reports directly to U.S. President Donald Trump. That's a lie. There was 10,000 shares on a Facebook post that said CBS News must accept the bias monitor. And then there's another video that shows, I can't remember who it was from the administration, Brendan Carr, I believe, the Trump administration FCC head, saying that Newsmax and CBS would put in place a bias monitor who will, quote, report directly to the president. That's not what happened, okay? Skydance agreed that they will have in place an ombudsman to evaluate complaints. It's not going to be appointed by the FCC. They're not reporting to Donald Trump. They're reporting to the news. So I think that actually this could be a good thing, that you have an ombudsman in place reporting to the director, the news director. What a concept. The confusion and the concern is that Donald Trump will influence that particular ombudsman, and that will not bring about factual information, and that we'll have to see. But the idea of appointing an ombudsman, I am all for on every level, from every newspaper to every radio station to every online provider of news. Everybody needs someone going, wait a minute, that's bullshit. Now, that in many cases, that won't come on online so-called independent reporting, because independent journalism actually in many cases isn't independent journalism. It's just a bunch of guys like us talking and giving our opinions. And so the actual, or a supposed former news anchor, many of whom are my friends, and I won't disparage them, but they're bringing newsmakers on and they're interviewing them and they're saying that that's news, but it might be great for a viral bite, but actual news, unless they come out and go, all right, here's the breaking news. I'm going to go and do this and that, and here's the proof to do it. It's just two people talking. So I don't know it'll be effective for independent journalism, but I certainly endorse, love, and respect having ombudsmen involved in the effort. As you know, where we grew up in Louisville, Health WHAS television, the CBS affiliate had an ombudsman. They had one man's opinion and that guy was an ombudsman. The newspaper had an ombudsman staff. They would constantly on page 2 of the Courier Journal and Louisville Times every day, you would turn to, corrections. You want to keep your credibility, correct your mistakes. That way people understand that if you do make a mistake, it's a victimless mistake. It's not made with malice of forethought. It's not made because you have a bent or a bias. It's made because you're human and you fucked up. That's what it boils down to. So having an ombudsman in place is not a bad thing. Having Donald Trump influence the ombudsman would be a bad thing, and that we don't know will happen yet. I'm sure he's going to try. I mean, after all, it's Donald Trump. If he could get Santa Claus to declare him God, he would do it. So I don't doubt that Donnie's going to have to, have a weigh in on an opinion on this. But the act of hiring an ombudsman, oh man, please, more of it.
We need to have more accountability, more more explanation of what the news process is about. I just think that that's so much of how we talk about media and journalism. It valorizes the individual fight between the journalist and the news and the government institution, which is important. Like, I'm not trying to downplay that, right? But the reason that all of that is happening is so the public can stay informed. The basic purpose of journalism is so people can participate politically, socially in their communities. That's the ultimate goal of what we're doing. And that means giving people the best information they have to make choices. That means asking the questions of officials or athletes or whoever for people to be able to sort of have those conversations among themselves to decide what to do, how to vote, how to organize, things that we want as a community. That's the purpose of journalism, ultimately. It's to enable community. It's to enable people to sort of form horizontal bonds and act in their own communities or get involved in the political process in other ways.
A shared reality based on facts. What
absolutely right. Absolutely, and at the point of
suggest that, don't you know, it's only Donnie's reality that matters.
Right, and then the point of this is that we want people to sort of understand how the information is getting to them. Like so much about what we're talking about, fits into this concept of sort of the philosophy of knowledge, right? How do we know what's true? There's a term called epistemology, right, which is the study of truth. How do we decide as a society what thing is true? I don't want to get too deep into that because everyone will fall asleep. But the point being is that we have, journalists have an epistemological approach to the world. Data, sources, triangulating information to figure out sort of what people agree on and where the conflicts are in an account, right? We've forever relied on government data because we think it's being, researched in the way that's going to be useful and helpful to people. But ultimately, it's not about them, right? Donald Trump's, I think, genius, and most politicians are like this, is they make it about them, right? You're engaged in centripetal force. They're bringing their supporters back into them through the concept of distrust. But ultimately, what we ought to be doing is making clear as citizens, as people in this country, that the goal is to sort of make common cause with each other, right? We're too locked into what these people think. And unfortunately, that's kind of that's sort of the news apparatus is in a lot of ways built around that. And that's not anybody's fault necessarily, sort of how things have come together. So what we really need to do is talk about ways to fix it. And that's the conversation that journalists need to have. That's the conversation that news funders need to have. How do we sort of reorient the information environment around what people need rather than what people like Donald Trump or your local politician want you to talk about?
Absolutely. Okay, guys. Moving forward with our theme, this coming school year in Oklahoma public schools, history teachers will be required to teach the debunked conspiracy that Democrats stole the 2020 presidential election from Donald Trump. Now, some may recall that in 2018, in a speech to veterans, Trump told the audience not to believe what they're seeing or reading in the media. Referring to his administration, he said to, quote, "just stick with us," end quote. Many media outlets at the time, including Time magazine, noted the iconic words from Orwell's novel, quote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command," end quote. Gentlemen, again, is it simply hyperbolic to say that these attempts to rewrite history and to control information seem to match Orwell's theme in 1984? Brian, since Mike just finished, why don't you go first?
I was actually going to turn it back to you, Mark.
Oh,
because Mark is the expert on this conversation on the distinction between history and memory, right? That's what you wrote about in your work. That's what your work deals with. So maybe we should turn that question on to you, Mark. Like, what's the difference between history and memory?
I will introduce sort of my simple definition of what's called collective or cultural memory, which is something happens and over time, based on the context of things that happen after this initial event, may create changes in the telling of the story of the past event. So that's collective or cultural memory.
Right. It's like what the past and then what we do with the past, right? Like how we remember it.
I think anybody who says that it's hyperbolic to accuse Donald Trump of being Orwellian is missing the point. I think it's optimistic to say that he's Orwellian. It's far worse. The idea that you would teach in a school disinformation and poison the minds of young children knowingly do so is, to me, a crime. It's a crime against humanity. You are trying to build an army of dullards who do not question authority. You are trying to create a society where people do not think for themselves. They think what is told to them. You are destroying the very foundation of the American Republic and a democracy. You are, in fact, one of the worst sinners on the planet. You are as bad as Hitler, any fascist, Pol Pot, any of them. And anybody who does that in Oklahoma should be boiled in their own pudding. As far as I'm concerned, the idea of prostituting education for the benefit of the few who run the government is anathema. And anybody who could argue anything different, you're wrong. Sorry, I'm right. You're wrong. Go to hell. The fact of the matter is, facts are facts. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you what the truth is. I'm gonna sit here and tell you what the facts are. You determine your truth from the facts. The facts are none of that is accurate. The facts are there was the Russia hoax. That didn't happen. The fact is Donald Trump didn't have the election stolen from him. The fact is Donald Trump lost. After investigation after investigation after investigation, no one found any evidence at all. And some of the investigations, folks, were not done by flaming liberal Democrats. These were Republicans who, God, wanted to find a fact to support what Donald Trump was saying. And they couldn't do it because in the court of law, that's the last place we have where facts are king. All your bullshit, all your glory, all of it means squat if you cannot prove it in court. Donald Trump can't prove it in court, so now he wants to teach it in schools in Oklahoma. And trust me, folks, I've been through Oklahoma. They need something better than Donald Trump right now. This is going to end badly. It is an anathema to the entire democratic process. It is against reality. It is dangerous. Period.
Dr. Mike?
Teaching the controversy is like the worst phrase in the world, especially when it comes to high school students,
God.
because what high school students generally do not have the skills yet to really understand this. Now, what I would say is you could teach the controversy to say that like the movement of people who believed this without evidence is like a major social force, right? I mean, they do teach the know-nothings and parties like that from the 19th century in our history books. But like there's the fact that people have sort of divorced themselves from like provable fact is a useful topic.
Flat Earth Society? Are you going to go into science class and go, the other idea is there's a flat Earth. By God, we don't live on a round Earth. No, man never went to the moon. You open up everything. If you do not, I can't imagine walking into a classroom and having, somebody teach me that the Salem witch trials were real witches.
Well, that's exactly right. So doubt, the production of doubt is it's a PR technique, right? So you look at there was a book by a former Secretary of Labor named David Michaels called Doubt is Their Product. And it's about the history of, I think it's the cigarette industry, right? That what they did is they engineered doubt about the dangers of smoking. It's not that they were denying that there was dangers, because everybody knew that like grandma's hacking cough sure didn't sound good, and she smoked for 50 years, right? They knew that in the 1960s.
But it was all that growing oak around their farm that did it.
Okay, sure, right? That must have been it. But the point is, as long as you can keep asking questions, this is one of the ways that science can get weaponized against itself. And this is a problem that goes to, again, goes back to things like philosophy of knowledge, which again, maybe we can do a sidebar on this at some point, not today, but like doubt, right? There's always more questions, right? A good scientific theory throws off more questions. We find another piece of detail, and then we make another observation, and then it opens up other questions. That's the point that's the scientific method. Doubt, right? The purpose of just saying we can never be convinced that X is happening, right? As long as you're never going to convince somebody to believe something as long as their paycheck depends on them not believing it. Famous quote. That's what this is, right? I can always find more doubt, more questions to ask, more studies that need to be done. That's true, right? How do we act in the nature in a moment of uncertainty, though? How do we act? What are the ways that we can understand what's correct or not? And data is one way. Proven, legal procedures throw off answers in some ways, and they're societally accepted answers, right? Sure, judges get things wrong, right? But at this point, we have no proof. I say this as a Wisconsin election worker. I got paid to go back and do the recount in 2020 after doing the original count, right? It was good for me, right? I got a whole the recount paid more than actually the day of the election. But ultimately, right, you go in there, you can reconstruct the whole election. We put the ballots in evidence bags, right? The whole process of working an election is really meant so you can go back and find things. And we did. And what we found, the votes were correct. The vote totals were accurate.
Well, one of the things that I think we all understand, and maybe we can help other people understand, is that critical thinking requires effort. It's a lot easier to accept everything that's being told to you without putting in the effort.
I would just say that we outsource these things because none of us have time to check everything ourselves, right? I don't have time to go crunch the data on global warming, right? I barely have the skill. I can barely read English, right? How am I going to crunch that data?
I know better than that.
Right. Well, who has time to do that, right? We have people develop expertise because they can do those jobs for us. It doesn't mean that they're infallible, right? There's a process. There's a way that science gets.
They have ombudsmans.
They do it. It's all the other scientists trying to, replicate their findings or challenge their findings. Right? We go, Mark and I have been through peer review together. Right? Somebody say, "Oh, this doesn't make sense." Right? We have these processes, and they're not perfect. Right? I'm never going to say that they're perfect. Right? Just they're not. But they're. What's a better process? Right? A multi-person system where people are looking at it, anonymously, looking at the work without names attached to sort of make sense of what's being said, or one guy spouting off next to during chopper talk.
Yeah. Right. What's better? Having people who've spent their entire lives studying the material, researching the material, assessing the material with the wherewithal and the education to understand the material, them giving us the information, or Fat Boy Slim out on the White House lawn screaming and ranting and raving because he doesn't like what he heard. Folks, it's a real simple, that doesn't require a whole lot of cognitive thought. I mean, you could have the cognitive capability of a freaking gerbil and get that. The thing is, you have to actually turn your brain on. And most people that have bought into Donald Trump's mess do not want to face the fact that they're wrong, because it means they've been wrong about it their whole life. And it's hard to swallow.
People. We can all be fair. We can all say we want things to be true that aren't true, right? I want Damian Lillard not to have torn his ACL back in Game 3, or his Achilles back in Game 3 of the Bucks Pacers series this year. I want that to be true. He couldn't walk, but clearly I want that to be true, right? The thing, we can want things to be true, we can believe that certain factual outcomes are not like worth pursuing, right? Like the point of politicians. Well, what I think there's a reasonable division of labor, right? We have expert scientists, we have people who study these things who can give us sort of a body of knowledge and beliefs about how things work in the world. But it is up to the politicians, right? What choices should we make, right? I think tariffs are a bad idea because they drive up prices on everybody, right? Every economist thinks that. It's a global warming.
Reagan thought that.
Right. Lots of people have said that forever. This is what economists tell us. Now, you're fine. Now, it's a reasonable thing for the Trump administration to say what the economists say is not an optimal outcome for other things, right? They're looking at X and this is what I think about Y, and therefore we're not going to listen to them, right? That's a political argument, right? But them saying tariffs are going to make things cheaper, right? Tariffs aren't going to cause prices to go up. That's a lie, right? That's not how it works. You could say the outcome is fine. I will accept this outcome, right? I will accept higher prices. I think Americans should want to pay higher prices if it means we can all work for Mattel for $11 an hour. Great, right? If you think that's the optimal outcome, you make that argument. They don't want to make those arguments, right? They want to basically say everything we're doing is perfect. So they have to bend the ways that we observe what's happening to those whims, and that's where the problem lies, right? That's where we end up in the 1984 question.
Well, the true problem is that as reporters, we're not equipped well enough to understand the nuance and report upon it. And so when Donald Trump claims the things that that we've all outlined here, the idea of having the cogent capability of assessing that information and the critical thinking to ask the proper question at the proper time in real time escapes most reporters. And once again, that's because most reporters covering the White House, covering DC, covering Congress, do not have the experience that reporters had when I first got into the business before they came to Capitol Hill. The fact of the matter is you've got kids coming straight out of college. God knows you all teach them that that some of them are not they're capable of handling what it is they're going to be in over their head. And that's the problem. You need to spend, when I got out of college, I was told 3 to 5 years in a small to medium market, learning your trade before you go somewhere else. Now they hire you straight out of school, put you in the White House, and you're just enamored of the fact that you're there and you're or in Congress or covering the Supreme Court. And you don't ask the questions because you've never worked the beat. You don't know what is critical. You don't know what it is that you're covering. You have no sources. You have to build all of that at the same time, do a live shot at 5 and 6. And by the way, here's what you're going to say. We've already written most of the script. Get a sound bite, do your stand up, get out. That's the problem in the press. And that's the reason why Donald Trump is able to do what he's able to do, because we are not well equipped to handle any type of pushback. We can't handle Congress, and they bow, and they're the tail end of the human centipede with Donald Trump. And we're sitting there watching it, looking at the droppings coming out of the end going, hey, that's gold. Let's go with it. And that's wrong.
How do you really feel, Brian?
These jobs used to be pinnacle jobs, right? You work your whole life to be a White House correspondent.
Good for them, right?
And now it's a stepping stone to being a talk show host. Getting a podcast.
I don't want to hear any more of these goddamn opinions. I think I've told you, I don't know if I've said it on this show or not, but the very first day I walked into the White House, that first row there, it was Sam Donaldson who said, Brian, those 7 seats there are 200 years worth of experience there. Listen to every one of them. And today, if you look at the first row of the Brady briefing room, you're lucky if there are 50 years worth of experience among those people sitting there. And that's the problem. And I blame Ronald Reagan. I still believe he destroyed journalism, and Donald Trump is reaping the rewards of it.
I want to see some wrinkled damn reporters in the White House briefing room. None of these smooth-faced, baby-faced people. I want give me some gray hair, give me some wrinkles, give me some frown lines. I want people who know
Johnny is going to go bullshit. Give me, I mean, that's what they did. And what was funny is I would get in fights with this administration, the first one, and some of the young reporters would gripe. I'll tell you who does know, who has the history still there. It's the photographers, and it's the technicians that have been on the job for 30 years. Those people, not the people in front of the camera, but those people behind the camera are the ones with the experience. So I remember one day this young man, Ryan, you're being so rude. And this is a photographer from Fox who goes, he's not doing anything that Sam Donaldson or Helen Thomas didn't do. That's the way it's supposed to be done. You're an idiot. And I said, gee, thanks. I'm buying you a drink after work.
All right, guys. I think we've done enough here. And I know some of us have to get on to other appointments. So thanks, Brian and Mike. We referred to the novel 1984 several times here. If you haven't read it since high school or you've never read it, perhaps it's time to give it a look or a second look. There was a movie released in 1984 based on the book. You can find it on several streaming services for free, like Pluto. And there's a kind of a bad copy of it on YouTube for free as well. I hope our audience today found our discussion to be helpful when it comes to understanding why this story matters. We would appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe, and join us again soon for another edition of Hard Pass. And now, while our audience tolerates the three of us, here's the fourth member of our team, Fiona, to play us out. Wait, what does that mean? Fiona, just do it live.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks to our listeners from the whole team here at Hard Pass. Please join us again soon for another episode of our podcast. And if you don't mind, hit the like and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.